Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to join us today for this wonderful conversation. My name is Trina Shanks. I'm director of the Center for Equitable Family and Community Wellbeing here at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Our vision is just to amplify ideas that empower families and communities to thrive. We started out doing listening sessions in the community and giving out small grants, but with COVID, we kind of had to draw back on that a little bit. So we really worked to build upon initial partnerships to promote projects that make sense. So it started out with just a few staff, myself, Patrick, Dominique Crump. We hired two wonderful faculty, Ashley Curitan and Camille Quinn. And then we really began to promote our faculty affiliate program. One of the first people to sign up and do a video and to support the center was Sean Drake. And so as we got to know one another, had sessions, we learned that he had a new book. And we thought it'd be great if he had a chance to share all the things he's learning in his book with the U of M community. So I will hand it over to Ashley to introduce Sean, and I look forward to hearing his remarks. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Hello there. It is so wonderful to see all of you today. As stated, my name is Ashley Curitan, and I am an assistant professor here in the School of Social Work and in the School of Education. I also am the first faculty affiliate of the center. So I cherish that title so much. Oh yeah. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome another affiliate. I feel like a friend now, a great colleague, to the University of Michigan community. I am going to read his bio, which is very impressive, with you before he comes up to present on his book. Dr. Drake is an assistant professor of sociology in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University, a senior research associate at the Maxwell Center for Policy Research, and a faculty affiliate at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Dr. Drake's research focuses on institutional mechanisms of segregation and inequality that disproportionately affect students and families of color. Today, he is going to present on his book, which is a study of school segregation based on over 2 years of observation and dozens of interviews in an affluent suburban district. Dr. Drake's work has been published in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, Urban Education, the Journal of Education for Students Placed at Risk, and several edited volumes. His research has been funded by the Ford Foundation, and he is a fellow of the Yale Urban Ethnography Project and the National Center for Institutional Diversity, NCID, here at the University of Michigan. As you can see, that's why we invited him here. Very, very impressive scholar. And so on that note, I welcome Dr. Drake to the stage, and please join me in welcoming him. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Trina and Ashley. Thank you all for having me, for being here this afternoon. My first time in Michigan. So first time at the University of Michigan, and it's great to be here and do what all the fuss is about. So, I'm glad to be able to make this trip. And I'm going to be speaking about my book today, Academic Apartheid, Race and the Criminalization of Failure in an American Suburb. So, and I'm also going to be kind of DJing between my laptop and the main system here. So today, nearly 70 years removed from the landmark Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education, the rate of de facto racial segregation between schools remains high. The primary reason for the continued segregation of schools is the widespread persistence of residential segregation, since most children attend school close to where they live. But school segregation is not only the product of factors external to schools. In Academic Apartheid, I focus on institutional mechanisms of school segregation and inequality, discrete yet distinct policies and practices that result in segregated schools without the influence of segregated neighborhoods. I draw from racialized organizations theory, which helps us better understand the central role of organizations in the reproduction of racial inequality. Three tenets of this theory are particularly useful in my work. First, racialized organizations, such as schools, enhance or diminish the agency of racial groups. Second, racialized organizations legitimate the unequal distribution of resources. And third, the decoupling of formal rules from organizational policy and practice is often racialized. Social reproduction theory is also a foundational component of my research. Schools replicate societal patterns of dominance and subordination, the distribution of valuable resources, and the degree of social distance and solidarity among various fragments of the working population. By and large, school systems reproduce inequality in the broader society by affording fewer educational opportunities and resources to lower income students than to their more affluent peers. In so doing, public school systems condition students for employment within a stratified economy. After the de jure segregation of schools was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, school segregation did not end. Instead, it either remained unabated or what was once between school segregation became within school segregation via tracking. Curriculum tracking results in the disproportionate placement of Black and Latinx students in lower level remedial classes. Tracking is a racialized practice that reproduces racial inequality in academic engagement and achievement. But apart from tracking, we still know relatively little about school segregation and inequality in middle class and affluent contexts, or in suburbs more broadly. Moreover, what we do know has overwhelmingly come from schools and districts in which racial diversity is predominantly in terms of Black and white. So there is a need for continued research on institutional mechanisms of school segregation other than within school tracking, particularly in community contexts that reflect the changing terrain of race and ethnicity in America. That need led me to Valley View in Southern California. So these are two pictures of Valley View, over 70 suburban square miles of gleaming corporate parks and master planned neighborhoods. The population is over 200,000 and growing steadily. In recent decades, Valley View has solidified its standing as a destination city for East Asian immigrants, many of them relocating from South Korea and China. Valley View's racial composition reflects this trend, with Asians comprising roughly 2/5 of the total population. Valley View is a desirable place to move because of its low crime rate, balmy weather, and stellar public schools. It is also an affluent suburb with a median household income well over $100,000 and 2/3 of adult residents over age 25 holding at least a bachelor's degree. Valley View is also one of the least residentially segregated cities of its size in the country. This project is a comparative ethnography of two dissimilar high schools located in the heart of Valley View. The first is Pinnacle High School, the district's flagship school known for its high-achieving students. Pinnacle is a neighborhood public school, meaning that students are eligible to enroll if they live within Pinnacle's residential catchment zone. Crossroads, my other field site, is a continuation school that draws its students from the 4 comprehensive public high schools in the district. Students are sent to Crossroads when they have fallen behind on course credits, such that they are no longer on pace to graduate with their class. Sociologist and urban ethnographer Elijah Anderson reminds us that ethnography is the systematic study of culture, typically the culture of a place or community that focuses on the daily lives of people there. Ethnographers discover, describe, and render understandable the characteristics, causes, and consequences of social phenomena, of the forms such phenomena assume, and of the variations they display. For this project, I conducted over 2 years of participant and non-participant observation at Pinnacle and Crossroads. I observed in various spaces and at numerous events, in classrooms, at assemblies, conferences, faculty meetings, back to school nights, sporting events, and graduations. Observing in a wide variety of school spaces allowed me to minimize the extent to which important aspects of the settings and situations under study would be inadvertently excluded from the data and analysis. I also conducted 122 in-depth interviews with a variety of institutional actors, and I engaged in numerous informal conversations with students, teachers, administrators, staff, and parents. This is a table showing the racial compositions of Valley View, Pinnacle, and Crossroads. I'd like to draw your attention to a few of the more striking figures here. First, Asian students are the numerical majority at Pinnacle, but account for less than 8% of the student body at Crossroads. Meanwhile, Latinx and Black students are grossly overrepresented at Crossroads, constituting nearly half of the student body there. This disparity indicates that Valley View's continuation school model disproportionately affects Black and Brown students in the district. Pinnacle and Crossroads also diverge on the district's measure of socioeconomic disadvantage, which is an annual income of $46,000 or less for a family of 4. This disparity indicates that Valley View's continuation school model disproportionately affects lower income students as well. Now, before I move on, I have some animations on my real slides that you're not able to see here. So I'm going to say a little bit about how I began this project. I don't want you to read all the way ahead on the slide. So I began this project interested in the experiences of Black and Latinx students living in Valley View and attending high school at Pinnacle. And I began my fieldwork sitting in on a sophomore US history class. Each of the 35 students in that class had an assigned seat and one of several rows of desks. And the teacher, Miss Miller, used a seating chart to take attendance. And she would often hand the chart to me after she took roll so that I could see who was present that day in class. And one day during my second full week of fieldwork, I noticed that Miss Miller had crossed Jamal's name off the list. Jamal was one of just 4 Black students in this class. After class, I asked Miss Miller about what had happened to Jamal, and she said that he had been transferred to Crossroads for credit recovery. She said that Crossroads was a continuation school. I knew nothing about Crossroads or continuation schools at all prior to this episode, but I quickly determined that what was at the time just a study of Pinnacle would need to expand to include Crossroads as well. Once the project became comparative between these 2 disparate high schools, my focus began to crystallize around the following central research question. Question number 1, how do elite public high schools and districts contribute to racial and social class inequality? Then, as I became aware of the divergent racial and socioeconomic profiles of Pinnacle and Crossroads, additional guiding questions emerged. What are the hidden mechanisms of segregation in this affluent district? And how does the district's model for dealing with struggling students place Black, Latinx, and lower income students at risk? This is Pinnacle High School, the flagship public high school in the Valley View Unified School District. Pinnacle sits on a sprawling 55-acre campus with meticulously manicured greenery and impressive school structures that rise above dozens of neatly pruned trees. Pinnacle boasts a theater/auditorium, gymnasium, all-weather track, football field, soccer field, baseball field, Olympic-sized swimming pool, several tennis courts, and separate buildings to house its math, science, humanities, arts, and athletic departments. The curriculum offers 29 honors and advanced placement courses, a variety of clubs and student government opportunities, and a robust peer tutoring program. Pinnacle is known for its academic rigor and high-achieving student population. 96% of Pinnacle graduates enroll in post-secondary institutions, and nearly 70% of these students enroll at 4-year colleges and universities within 6 months of graduation. These are impressive numbers for any high school, let alone a public school serving more than 2,000 students each year. Signs of Pinnacle's academic excellence are strategically placed on either side of an archway that frames the school's main entrance. National Exemplary School and California Distinguished School are annual awards for graduation rates and test scores. However, these accolades are a permanent feature of Pinnacle's architecture, such that they have in effect tattooed these distinctions to their building as essential components of their institutional culture and identity. The academic culture at Pinnacle is characterized by what I refer to as an exacting institutional success frame. A frame is a schemata of interpretation that helps people locate, perceive, identify, and label various episodes in their lives and the world around them. Frames enable individuals to make sense of their experiences, and they inspire both individual and collective action. I draw from this notion to conceptualize an institutional success frame. A collective interpretation of academic achievement cultivated by institutional actors, such as school administrators, teachers, students, and parents. At Pinnacle, the institutional success frame is lofty and exacting. Academic excellence is the expectation. Students frequently enroll in a challenging series of honors and advanced placement classes, strive to attain a grade point average of 4.0 or better, aim for top marks on standardized tests, and seek admission to prestigious four-year colleges and universities. The institutional success frame, I don't want you to read the quote yet, so you're going to have to bear with me while this old slides up, because I can't use my animations. The institutional success frame at Pinnacle divides the school into two types of students, those who are recognized as high academic achievers and those who are not. This division shows up in curriculum tracking, but it also affects students' sense of community and belonging. For example, each year in late April, Pinnacle holds a college sweatshirt day, where graduating seniors come to school wearing a new sweatshirt from their college of choice to celebrate this achievement. Apparel from renowned four-year colleges and universities are abundant on this day, but the experience can be alienating for students who do not have high grades or competitive test scores. Diana, a Latina senior, did not participate. I didn't wear a sweatshirt yesterday. No way. There was this pack of kids going to UCLA and they were so annoying. I'm just going to community college next year, and it's kind of embarrassing sometimes if you're not going to a fancy school. People look at you like, what happened? Now, I later learned from one of her teachers that Diana would be the first in her family to attend college, but this exceptional achievement was completely overshadowed by her friends and classmates who had parents with graduate degrees and were accepting offers from some of the most highly ranked colleges and universities in the nation. Same thing again here. So this dichotomous institutional culture in which students are either high achievers or not high achievers is also heavily racialized. At Pinnacle, academic achievement is construed as the province of Asian students. Asian students are widely hailed as responsible for the school's sterling reputation. I learned this through classroom observations, but also in interviews and other conversations with institutional actors. When speaking with the school principal, who'd been at Pinnacle for nearly a decade, I asked him to characterize the impact that Asian students had on the school. His response was immediate and unequivocal. They are what keeps our school rank high. They improve our scores. If you're a teacher that wants order and doesn't want to have to deal with problems, and you want the kids that come in and know their stuff, you want the Chinese and Korean kids. This racialization of achievement has become deeply embedded in Pinnacle's classroom culture, such that teachers leverage it as a pedagogical tool. For example, on the first day of school, Miss Watson, a white middle-aged AP US history and psychology teacher, distributed several handouts to her psychology class, which provided details about the curriculum. 12 of the 20 students in this class were Asian, 6 were white, and 2 were Latino. Don't be alarmed by all of the handouts, she stated, before adding, it's not like you need to read every word, okay? Relax, don't be all Asian about it. Some students smiled while others chuckled at these racialized instructions. For these students and for the school community in general, there was a tacit understanding of what it meant to be all Asian about one's study habits. Later that same day, a Pinnacle English teacher candidly admitted to me, I don't necessarily look at my classroom and treat a kid differently because they are Asian, but I know that if I have an Asian student in my classroom, that student will probably work hard and be engaged, and I can rely on that kid and the parents more so than I can for other groups. The racialization of achievement is also supported by ethno-racial community resources that are recognized by and embedded within the school. Pinnacle has a standard PTA group that is open to all parents, but since 2003, it's also had a separate Korean PTA strictly for Korean parents of current students. One of the Korean PTA's most important functions is to facilitate parental involvement, softening the language barrier for Korean immigrant families by translating school materials into Korean. They also hold a monthly meeting to share information, host workshops with guest speakers, and generally keep Korean parents informed of school affairs. The Korean PTA also supports the school financially and generally promotes the notion that Korean students succeed due to their Korean cultural values. The Korean PTA hosts school events, such as an annual teacher appreciation luncheon. At the luncheon, each seat is accompanied by a program that includes a short written statement of thanks from the president of the association and a lunch menu organized into appetizer, entree, and dessert items. Business sponsors and the names of all members and their children who are enrolled at Pinnacle are listed on the back of the program. This list is a clear signal to teachers who check to see if they recognize any names of students who are in one of their classes. Lunch is served as a buffet with over a dozen different dishes and an impressive display of Korean culinary culture. The event ends with a raffle for teachers with prizes, such as a weekend getaway on the Napa Valley wine train, followed by an announcement of thousands of dollars in cash and supply donations to the school. The Korean PTA also hosts an annual 3-day Korean cultural education program, open to 25 teachers from each of the district's high schools. The Korean PTA pays each teacher $300 cash for their attendance. The schedule includes guest lectures from local college professors, music and dance performances, and roundtable discussions with Korean parents and high school students. These cultural lessons include a strong emphasis on how Korean cultural customs and values can be used by teachers to help Korean students in their classrooms. The conference closes at the end of day 3 with a dinner at a local Korean restaurant owned by a member of the Korean PTA. The teachers are hosted in a private room away from other patrons. A constant wave of restaurant staff bring a boundless assortment of food for guests. And near the end of the dinner, Hannah, the president of the Korean PTA, asked the teachers to share with the entire dinner party their favorite part of the conference and something they learned that they can use in their classrooms and share with their teachers. Meanwhile, Black and Latinx students in the district are often perceived in a very different light. Over the course of my fieldwork, I identified distinct institutional mechanisms of segregation that disproportionately placed Black and Latinx students at risk of being pushed out to crossroads. The two most glaring examples are Pinnacle's threshold of credit deficiency policy and coordinated pressure from institutional actors to compel students to transfer. Pinnacle's policy for attending to struggling students includes a threshold of credit deficiency that a given student must reach before they are deemed a candidate for transfer to Crossroads. Students typically reach this threshold after failing 2 classes in the same semester, failing the same class twice, or if their cumulative grade point average dips below 2.0. Others approach or meet the threshold because they've transferred to Pinnacle from another district or state, and not all of their course credits are accepted. This credit deficiency policy and the low bar for meeting the threshold disproportionately affects Pinnacle's Black and Latinx students. This is school-wide data on Pinnacle students' grade point averages. It shows that Black and Latinx students' grades are, on average, considerably lower than those of their white and Asian peers. Black and Latinx students at Pinnacle are roughly twice as likely as white students and 4 times as likely as Asian students to maintain a cumulative grade point average in the bottom quartile. Since the threshold is so closely linked to grades, students who identify as Black or Latino are more likely to reach this threshold. But the credit deficiency policy is arbitrary. I found it was common for counselors and assistant principals at Pinnacle to recommend the transfer of a student who had not yet reached the threshold. When I asked the principal at Pinnacle about this, he shrugged. Sometimes we see a kid that maybe isn't totally at that threshold, but we see that their grades have been slipping. Last year, we had a handful of sophomores that we wanted to send because we wanted to kind of do it sooner rather than later. But Crossroads said no. We went back and forth on the issue with them, but ultimately the kids had to stay here until they met that threshold. Transfer to Crossroads is voluntary, but I found it to be customary for Pinnacle administrators to apply considerable pressure on a student and their parents when the family resisted a transfer. Mr. Holt, a Pinnacle assistant principal, described this process as a joint effort between counselors and assistant principals to persuade the family to leave Pinnacle. I'll get involved if the parents need the hard sell, like if the parents are blocking the move or saying no. I dealt with parents last year who went over to Crossroads to take a look, and they came back here and they were like, it's got fences around it. It looks like a prison. I don't want my kid there. I told them that our rigorous environment at Pinnacle is just bad for some kids. So administrators like Mr. Holt leveraged this institutional success frame during the transfer decision process, referencing the academically rigorous environment at Pinnacle to legitimize and sell a transfer to Crossroads to students and parents. And students and parents need to be sold on this move because they routinely question the merits, legitimacy, and overall consequences of making this switch. In addition to arguing that Pinnacle was simply too academically stringent for some students, Pinnacle counselors and principals would often attempt to reassure skeptical students and parents by telling them that a diploma from Crossroads was the same level of diploma that students received from Pinnacle. Well, the schools are certainly different, but the diplomas are the same. And that's what we tell families. Whether you graduate from here or Crossroads, you get the same diploma issued by the Valley View Unified School District. The only difference is the name of the school. It's not a lesser degree. It's not a certificate. Now, this statement, though true on its face, omits the key fact that the Crossroads curriculum is limited such that graduates are unable to directly enroll in a 4-year university. Delivering this accurate but conveniently incomplete information about the diplomas helps to legitimize the transfer process and persuade students and families to acquiesce. Black and Latinx students at Pinnacle routinely expressed the belief that the school catered to the highest achieving students and hastily pressured struggling students to leave for Crossroads. Among Black students in particular, there was a sense that you'd better not mess up your grades or they'll send you to Crossroads. Mariah, a sophomore, expressed views that are representative. It's supposed to be a great school, but the teachers don't care about you. They just care about the students who started off good and are the top students. When I struggled, they were trying to find a way to get me out of the school instead of helping me. They just pressured me to go to Crossroads. They said there was no hope for me if I stayed at Pinnacle, but I just needed more help. The voluntary aspect of the transfer policy and the practice of pressuring students and parents to comply also reveals how social class inequality affects who ends up at Crossroads. With a choice to stay or go, but under pressure from administrators to transfer, students from more privileged backgrounds could rely on their family's social, cultural, and economic capital to garner additional academic support and remain at Pinnacle. For example, when Thomas, a white 17-year-old junior at Pinnacle, fell credit deficient, his parents, who were both attorneys, refused to send him to Crossroads and instead hired 2 private tutors for him. His grades improved with the extra help, and he went on to graduate with his class on time from Pinnacle. In another case, I met a Korean PTA member whose daughter had failed 2 classes at Pinnacle as a freshman. When the school recommended that the girl begin her sophomore year at Crossroads, her parents withdrew her from Pinnacle and enrolled her in a nearby private school. They did this after consulting with fellow members of the Korean PTA. With the social and cultural capital provided by the Korean PTA and the economic capital to pay the $40,000 private school tuition, these parents kept their daughter out of Crossroads. An assistant principal at Pinnacle confirmed that the decisions that credit deficient students made and their parents made about whether or not to transfer often reflected socioeconomic differences. It's like pulling teeth to get them to agree to the transfer. I've never seen a student who was excited about it, but the ones who end up staying at Pinnacle are the ones who have parents who can just throw money at whatever the problem is. Pinnacle administrators were more likely to prevail over students and families who lacked the capital to successfully resist. For example, Savannah, a Black sophomore, moved to Valley View with her mother after attending freshman year of high school in North Carolina. She fell behind on her coursework immediately at Pinnacle because Pinnacle did not recognize all of her freshman credits from her former school. A few months after Savannah was transferred to Crossroads, I spoke with her mother, Tanya, who had recently landed a job as a waitress at a local diner. Tanya expressed frustration that Pinnacle had not done more to help Savannah remain at the school, and disappointment that she was not able to afford a more desirable alternative. We lived with extended family when we got here because I hadn't found a new job yet. And then Pinnacle says they're going to send Savannah to this Crossroads school when she had barely had time to get settled in. I wanted to get her some professional tutoring so she could maybe stay at Pinnacle, but I don't have the money for all that. So now she's at Crossroads, which is disappointing because we moved here partly because of the good schools. Like Savannah, Edson, a 17-year-old Latino junior at Crossroads, moved to Valley View from out of state with his mother, a single mom who earned a modest income as a bus driver. After struggling academically during his sophomore year at Pinnacle, Edson arrived on campus in August before his junior year to register for classes. But to his surprise, Pinnacle had other plans for him. I showed up for orientation in the summer, and the lady in the office was like, "Oh, I don't think you're coming back to Pinnacle this year." Nobody told me or my mom anything, not even a phone call or an email about it. And so we went to the assistant principal, and he said that my credits were bad and I wouldn't graduate if I stayed at Pinnacle. My mom got pretty pissed at him, and her plan was to get me a tutor, but that was just too expensive. So without the resources to pursue other options, Edson reluctantly enrolled at Crossroads. This is Crossroads, one of more than 450 continuation high schools in the state of California. There are currently about 500,000 students enrolled in continuation high schools nationally, and about 85,000 such students in California alone. A central focus in recent years on improving public school test scores has incentivized high schools across the country to push lower achieving students into continuation schools. Crossroads is a public high school in the Valley View Unified School District, but it's not a neighborhood school. No student attends Crossroads because of where they live in Valley View. Instead, Crossroads draws its students from those who are behind on course credits at one of the 4 comprehensive high schools in the district. Students can return to their home institution once they've recovered enough credits, but return is rare. During my 2 years of fieldwork, only 17% of eligible students transferred back to their comprehensive site. As you can see in this photograph, classrooms at Crossroads are housed in several rectangular buildings with low ceilings, a design that resembles a series of trailers. The grass is not cut and is growing wildly. The trees are not pruned. And right in the center of the picture there, you can see one of 3 tall spotlight poles for added surveillance of students. At Crossroads, the hedges that greet students at the gated entrance to the school are dead or dying. And these metal bars that you see here form a fence that runs around the entire perimeter of the campus. Now, a fence around a school is not necessarily noteworthy, but Crossroads is the only high school in Valley View with a perimeter fence such as this. So this is not an inviting or welcoming place for students and families. Pinnacle and Crossroads differ sharply in terms of the opportunities that they afford students. At back to school night in the fall of my second full year of fieldwork, some students were selling t-shirts that read, "Crossroads Athletics, undefeated since 1974. This is a joke because Crossroads has no sports teams. In fact, they have no drama program, no music program, no clubs for students, no PTA, and no library. Crossroads graduates are ineligible to be admitted to a 4-year college or university, even if they graduate with a 4.0 grade point average. This is due to the school's limited curriculum which offers only the minimum number and type of courses required to obtain a high school diploma in the state of California. This means that community college, trade school, low-wage job, military are the only immediate options for most graduates. Crossroads students are also forbidden from setting foot on the campus of any of the comprehensive high schools in the district, including the one from which they have been transferred. And they can be detained by campus security or law enforcement if they break the school. When Cecilia, a Pinnacle student who had ended up at Crossroads, found out that she had to transfer, she dreaded the move. I started asking around at Pinnacle, and I heard that all the kids are drug addicts and you might get assaulted in the bathroom, and the bathroom is always filled with smoke. I got so terrified and I went home and cried. And then my first day at Crossroads, I saw all the bars and stuff, and I was just really worried. I couldn't believe that this was a school. Now, assaults in smoke-filled bathrooms don't actually happen at Crossroads. In fact, I saw more fights at Pinnacle than I did at Crossroads doing my field work. But these are pervasive stereotypes that circulate widely in all of Valley View's public high schools. Because of its lowly reputation, Crossroads carries an institutional stigma that rubs off on students once they enroll. Like so many of his classmates, Juan, a Latino senior, felt this stigma acutely. My dad has a real estate business, and sometimes I help him out at work. He was upset when he learned I had to go to Crossroads. He didn't want anyone to know because he thought it would downgrade his business and our family name. So if someone asks, I just say I still go to Pinnacle. I found that Crossroads students told lies and half-truths like this all the time to friends and family, and often with the support of their parents, as a way to save face and avoid being discredited by their association with the institution. Unlike Crossroads, Pinnacle has an open campus with no walls or fences to separate the school from the surrounding neighborhood. Students are permitted to leave campus during lunch period or a free period, and they often do so as a way to socialize with friends. They hang out at their cars in the student parking lot or venture off campus to grab lunch. Crossroads students have very little freedom of movement by comparison. Students enter and exit the school through a gated door in the fence, which remains closed and locked from the first bell of the day until dismissal time. They cannot leave campus during the school day, and they are often denied access to the restroom during class. The arrangement between Crossroads and the district's four mainstream high schools stipulates that students are transferred due to academic issues, not behavioral ones. In fact, there is another separate alternative high school in Valley View for students who repeatedly break rules or the law. Nevertheless, the physical space at Crossroads has multiple features that are common of disciplinary schools for students with behavioral problems or schools located in neighborhoods plagued by violence and illicit activity. In addition to the tall metal fence, spotlights for surveillance, and a lack of off-campus privileges, an SUV or squad car from the Valley View Police Department remains parked conspicuously at the curb for the duration of the school day. A Valley View police officer armed with a stun gun and service pistol is on hand to observe the yard during arrival, lunch, passing periods, and dismissal. A squad car from the Valley View Police Department is often parked in front of Pinnacle as it is at Crossroads, but police presence at Pinnacle is quite different from police presence at Crossroads. At Pinnacle, police presence is meant to protect the school community from outsiders. At Crossroads, the police presence is meant to protect teachers and students from other students. At Crossroads, I found that a wide variety of school community members were quick to criticize the school's disciplinary posture towards students. It feels like you're in a prison sometimes because of the bars. There's very little freedom at all, and we're always being watched. It's like they don't trust us. The school principal openly criticized the campus layout. The district built this school according to a prison model. It's unfortunate. I'd love to tear that damn fence down. And in a casual conversation with the on-duty police officer at Crossroads, he said, I deal with bad kids. Trust me, these aren't bad kids. They're only bad because Valley View schools see them that way. Dumping struggling students to one high school has consequences for the social environment and academic culture there. Many Crossroads students start out working hard, but gradually lose focus and motivation within an institutional culture of academic apathy. Coleman, a Black 18-year-old senior at Crossroads, told me, "I definitely see kids changing while they're here. Most come here just for credits, and then when they come here, their mentality changes. They get around a couple bad influences. They start hanging out all the time. They stop doing the work that they're here to do. It's like they send you here to restore your credits, but there's actually a lot more distractions in a worse way here. So it's hard to get back on track. It's a complete contradiction." After speaking with Coleman about the academic culture and spending several weeks observing classroom interactions, I began asking Crossroads teachers if they noticed changes in the comportment of their students over time. I found that teachers noticed an alarming trend of gradual disengagement in their students, corroborating Coleman's assessment. Ms. Davis, a history teacher at Crossroads, told me that this trend was a school-wide problem. For instance, we have a student who, when she first showed up, came in, did all her work, and tried to catch up on credits. Now, within a year, she's fallen way down where she's failing, and she doesn't even care. She got mixed in here with the wrong people and basically had continuous opportunities to connect with kids who don't make smart decisions. So there's this ironic contradiction in which a school that supposedly exists to help students get back on track academically complicates that objective by creating an environment that presents challenges to student engagement and achievement. I found that students who were able to succeed at Crossroads were those who successfully avoided the many distractions around them, succeeding not because of the credit recovery environment, but in spite of it. Jamal, the student at Pinnacle who's transferred to Crossroads, led me to expand the scope of this project, was one of the best players on Pinnacle's varsity football team. Just a few weeks after his transfer to Crossroads, I saw him back at Pinnacle, wearing his football pads, carrying his uniform on the way to football practice. And this was confusing to me because I had just seen him at Crossroads earlier that same day. The situation was that Jamal had recovered enough credits that they were letting him play football at Pinnacle, but they were not letting him take classes there. So from an institutional perspective, he was helpful to them on the field, but he was a liability to them in the classroom. He hurt them in the classroom, helped them on the field. He was an athletic asset and an academic liability. So to summarize, at Pinnacle High School, an exacting and divisive institutional success frame marginalizes those who do not meet its tenets. High academic achievement is racialized as the province of Asian students, and hidden institutional mechanisms of segregation and inequality place Black, Latinx, and lower income students at risk. At Crossroads, we see the criminalization of students who are behind academically. Crossroads features an austere campus layout and punitive policies, including a perimeter fence, constant police presence, spotlights for surveillance, no off-campus privileges, and the threat of detention for setting foot on the campus of a comprehensive high school. The school has a severely truncated curriculum that precludes direct enrollment in a four-year college. For students, enrollment at Crossroads becomes a stigmatizing master status of deviance, shame, and failure, and a concentration of credit deficient students undercuts the school's purported goal of facilitating credit recovery. It's routine for students to arrive determined to get back on track and recover credits, but gradually yield to a distracting culture of academic apathy that derails their progress. So I'm going to talk about three of the sort of main conclusions here. Talk about each of these three in turn. Examining culture at the level of an institution is useful in revealing institutionalized cultural mechanisms by which schools reproduce inequality. The institutional success frame is one such mechanism. At Pinnacle, it divides the school into two general types of student: high achievers taking a slate of honors and AP classes on one hand, and everyone else who isn't on the other. But it doesn't just do this in terms of curriculum tracking. The success frame also determines who truly belongs in the school community. Diana did not belong on sweatshirt day, an episode emblematic of her lack of belonging overall. Jamal did not belong in any classroom, even though he was accepted on the football field. The success frame also affects how institutional actors respond to students' needs. When Mariah struggled in a couple classes, she felt more pressure to transfer out than support to improve her grades. Pinnacle is deeply invested in managing a stellar academic reputation and can jettison lower performing students to crossroads instead of investing resources in those youth and embracing the responsibility of educating all students. And this dichotomous success frame makes it easier to push lower achieving kids out. The argument can be made that they simply do not fit in, that Pinnacle is too academic for them, that they would be better served at Crossroads. The institutional success frame is also heavily racialized. Model minority stereotypes and tropes fit neatly into Pinnacle's binary frame of achievement and failure because they imply that Black and Latino students are not model citizens and are somehow flawed. At Pinnacle, the model minority construct is ubiquitous. When a Pinnacle teacher says to her students, "Don't be all Asian about it," that statement works as both a joke and a directive. Overall, Asian students at Pinnacle and their parents are regarded as institutional assets, while Black and Latinx students are seen as liabilities and potential problems to be dealt with. And shepherding those students to Crossroads is a way of dealing with them. In terms of school segregation, this is a case of between school segregation that operates independently from forces of neighborhood segregation. Creating separate schools for students who are having academic difficulty and structuring such schools according to a prison model can have unintended negative consequences. Crossroads students are routinely stereotyped and labeled as failures simply by virtue of their enrollment. Policies and practices that impose negative labels on students tend to treat students themselves as problems rather than focusing on the social, emotional, and environmental factors that might contribute to low achievement. Segregation of students to Crossroads is ironic because these students who arguably need more resources and support have been pushed out of a comprehensive high school and into an academic environment with far fewer resources and where a culture of academic apathy is in the air. Running a tall iron fence around the campus just adds insult to injury. Sending students to continuation schools such as Crossroads is really an extreme form of tracking. It's tracking between schools rather than within them. Tracking between schools is worse, as it results in the total social and academic marginalization of students. Tracking between schools, in this case, is academic apartheid. I want to end by mentioning some of the theoretical and policy implications that I lay out in the book. The Korean PTA shows how resource-rich immigrant parents can embed that co-ethnic support within institutions. This institutionalization of ethnic capital shapes Korean immigrant families' interactions with the school district in ways that are beneficial to them. It also shapes institutional culture in ways that affect students, parents, and pedagogy. This study also reveals mechanisms by which racial and social class inequality are reproduced in public school districts. The Valley View case shows how districts can generate forms of between school segregation, even in affluent suburbs where the rate of residential segregation is low. The study also contributes to our understanding of how institutions can enhance or diminish the agency of different racial groups, legitimate a racially unequal distribution of resources, and engage in practices that deviate from stated policy in ways that perpetuate and exacerbate inequality. Moving forward, a more equitable approach to credit recovery would be to develop credit recovery programs at comprehensive high schools so that credit deficient students could avoid being segregated into a continuation school system that often fails to engage them and prepare them for life after high school. This would also keep students connected to the resources at their comprehensive high school and maintain continuity in their education. Continuation school sites could then be repurposed as vocational education centers, summer school hubs, or multi-purpose spaces for the district. These steps would create a more balanced and inclusive system of credit recovery in which the schools with the most resources would be truly accountable to every student. And that concludes my prepared remarks, and I'd love to take your questions. Thank you.
So please join me in thanking Dr. Drake for a compelling presentation. So I had the opportunity to read his entire book before today. And so I came up with 22 questions. I will not post 22 questions. Although some of my students are here, they know I could do it, right? I really would. I will post 2 questions and then we can open it up to everyone else. And since I had a chance to read the book, I mean, some of my questions, you know, it is what it is. And I wanted to give context to the audience. So it's a little meaty in the spirit of an academic, right? We like big questions. So as your research suggests, there is a direct correlation between residential segregation and school segregation. According to an article published in Education Week in 2022 called An Expansive Look at School Segregation Shows It's Getting Worse, school districts can attempt to reconfigure the demographics of each school, but dramatically reducing school segregation is going to be a challenge without also changing residential patterns, which are driven by racial and economic disparities. Considering your own research, can you think of any recommendations you would offer to school districts who are seeking to desegregate their schools?
That's a really good question. So yeah, I think first of all, the biggest barrier to desegregation is residential segregation, which remains quite entrenched. You know, we made some movement on it coming out of the civil rights movement. But I mean, even if you look at Brown v. Board in 1954, nothing really happened until after the Civil Rights Act in 64. And it wasn't like, oh, the Supreme Court said that this is unconstitutional, so now everything's going to integrate. It didn't happen. There was just tremendous backlash against the law. And the onus was placed on Black and brown families to do the integrating. Like the federal government there were no teeth in the law to enforce it. So that happened in the 60s. And we saw some movement from like 68 to 1980. And since then, it's either been like stalled progress or backsliding. And, but a lot of it is really rooted in residential segregation. You know, we did busing, we've done that, like we did school choice. But residential segregation is really the kind of main driver of school segregation because most kids go to their neighborhood school despite all the other models. And then there's a lot of backlash to integration. You know, there are a lot of parents who like the status quo, who want things to be the way they are. So I think we know what works. We saw movement on this in the late 60s, 70s, but we've had some backlash, which is sort of typical of the United States. You know, three steps forward, 2 steps backwards. This is American history. And the same thing has been true, I think, with integration of schools. So in some ways, we're doing a little worse now than maybe we were 40 years ago. But I think that, residential segregation is a big issue. So I think we have to address housing inequality. But I also think that something else we can do, there's a couple things that we can do with schools. I think we need to invest in schools in all neighborhoods better so that we're not like waiting for neighborhoods to be more equitable for schools to improve for all kids, right? Like there's no reason why schools can't have, why a school that has a disadvantaged school population can't have more funding and more resources. Those are just decisions that are made at some higher level. So I think we need to have more investment in those schools, right? So rather than saying, let's close the school, let's shut it down, the school is failing. Well, no, why don't we make that school better? Why don't we invest the same resources that we see, across town? So I think that's something that can be done. But residential segregation is the biggest, is the biggest issue. So I think that's something that, in order to address the education issue, we have to address housing.
Thank you. All right, my second question is tangentially connected to your research. And so if I'm like beyond the scope of what you focus on, let me know. But as many of you are aware of, there is an ongoing debate on whether charter schools increase segregation. And yet schools remain highly segregated by race and class, as your research shows, in part because of the segregation of neighborhoods, which largely determine where students enroll. Charter critics allege that these public schools of choice are instead driving resegregation. They worry that if socioeconomically advantaged families take advantage of school choice opportunities and leave the most disadvantaged students behind in the worst schools, choice could exacerbate segregation. I'm sure you know this, but I wanted to make sure people in the room are following my logic here. So based on your research, and once again, if this is outside the scope of what you do, let me know. How would your research inform this ongoing debate, if at all? I know you just brought up choice.
Yeah. So choice is interesting. I mean, like in New York City, there's a lot, it's like a big school choice system there. But what they found is it hasn't done much to desegregate schools. And what students usually end up attending a school that looks just like their neighborhood school, right? Or they'll get accepted into a school that's an hour away, and you can't get on the subway in 6th grade and go an hour. It's just not feasible there. So I think school choice, I don't think school choice is the answer. And also we see that oftentimes the parents who have the most social, cultural, economic capital, particularly kind of context relevant to that particular district, are the ones who end up getting their, getting that system to work for them and taking all the top slots. So I don't think that school choice is the answer. I don't think that charter schools are the answer. Charter schools, some of them do a really good job. Some of them don't do a very good job. Oftentimes the charter schools will look just like the neighborhood schools in terms of segregation and equality. So I think that charter schools are sort of hit or miss. The other issue I have with charter schools is that oftentimes people who are proponents of charter schools, end up promoting policies that kind of defund public education, and they're sort of taking the focus off of public schools, which remain the vast majority of schools. So I think we need to really invest resources in public education rather than looking to charter schools as like, a magic wand that's gonna fix the problem. So there are certainly examples of charter schools, Harlem Children's Zone, stuff like that have done a good job. But I think that what would be better is just investing in the schools that already exist. So taking those resources you would put into that charter school and instead putting it into neighborhood schools. So I think that's part of it. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but. Yeah.
And the last question, and this is because once again, I had the privilege of reading your book and understanding like your motivation for doing this research. I thought it might be interesting to actually share that with the audience. Like, what motivated you to engage in this work?
Yeah, so I'm from San Francisco, and I grew up in San Francisco is like a progressive metropolis. So San Francisco prides itself on being very liberal, very, very progressive. And yet it's very segregated. There's a ton of income inequality. And so, growing up, that was something that I saw because I would take the city bus everywhere, including to and from school sometimes. And I would sit at the back of the bus and I would see who got on and off at which stops. And it was like, oh, this neighborhood, this is where like the Mexicans get on the bus. And this is where the Vietnamese get on the bus. You would just see that it was different neighborhoods, and they would get off the bus at different places. So I said, wow, the sort of segregation of neighborhoods and work, I was sort of seeing as I would take the bus. And I always went to schools that had a lot of resources, where I was one of very few students of color in any class that I was ever in. And I had family and friends who looked like me who went to schools that looked like prisons. And I thought that seemed unfair because they were smart and capable and they just didn't have those opportunities. And I sort of wondered why. And so when I was sort of setting out to do this work, I guess I was interested in students like me originally. I wanted to kind of investigate kind of my experience sociologically and do it at this high school, Pinnacle High School, which was similar to the type of high school that I went, and find those Black and brown students who were at a school like that, maybe living in the neighborhood down the street. And, how are they sort of dealing with that? Because I often felt like feelings of isolation, and feeling like, like I had this deficit of credibility, when I was in those spaces. So I was really interested in that. And then as I started kind of hanging out, you sort of heard the story about how student Jamal, and all of a sudden he's not there and he's at Crossroads. And then I see that Black and brown students are overrepresented by a factor of 5. And so then it sort of expanded that way. But I think just, growing up, seeing inequality, seeing both sides of it, having friends and family who had very different experiences, that's what sort of motivated me to, try to kind of understand why that's happening. And yeah, I mean, I had teammates. I did a lot of track and field when I was younger, and I had teammates who looked just like me, but lived on the other side of the city, different school, fights all the time, come to track practice with their shirt collars ripped. And they said, do you ever have fights at your school? And I would say, no, never have fights at my school. And they just couldn't believe it. They would like teach me how to fight. I was like, okay, but I never have to fight at my school. Like a fight at my school was like somebody calling somebody a name. Like there was never a fight. It was never physical. But for them, like that was something they had to deal with. I remember thinking like, wow, that's crazy. Like you can't learn in that environment, and I was probably like 12, 13. I'm just like, wow, I wish they could come to my school, kind of selfishly, because then I'd like have more friends and more people who look like me. But also because I was just like, wow, they're just getting cheated. Like the system is just not working for them. And these are really smart. Like they were, it wasn't their fault. There was nothing wrong with them. So, that was sort of, so definitely my sort of background and growing up really kind of motivated the work that I do, and some of the new stuff I'm doing. Like it all goes back to just things I've seen or experienced.
Thank you. I will pause there and open it up to folks in the audience. Oh yeah.
You're keeping the online.
Oh, good. So, Sean, this was fantastic.
Thank you.
Nothing short of fantastic. Your talk, as well as the cover of your book, has really sparked a lot of my own kind of thoughts about why I do the work I do. I appreciate what you just shared, all of what you shared, but especially your primary motivation for why you wanted to do this work. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is kind of related to something that I've been kind of asking myself. At one point, my work, I primarily focused on young Black girls and young women, particularly those who are beyond crossroads. They're likely in a school and a detention center or possibly even prison, and trying to keep them from going deeper into the system. And what I have been grappling with is, as I have delved into that area of work, I have come across these areas of criminalization, other people's kind of interpretations, where a lot of these issues start in schools. Michelle Fine talks about the circuits of oppression and dispossession and privilege, and how that really is the kind of, at least what she postulates, is one of the kind of root causes related to all that you described. And so my question to you is, given that you've kind of uncovered this level of real structural and systemic practices that are aligning with what you're calling as criminalization of failure, what do you do with that knowledge? Because I feel the same way. Like one example is, even though the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention says that states shouldn't put girls or young people in jail or prison detention for status offenses, what some jurisdictions have done is figure out, quote unquote, how to up crime. So they'll look at a series of very low offense charges and treat those as if they're a higher offense, a misdemeanor or a felony.
Yeah.
So they get around some of these larger kind of goals. So how do you think you can operationalize this in ways that parents, yourself, people in this room can become more engaged in actively trying to change what we found out here today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things I'm thinking about with that. So first, I mean, just in terms of what I talked about today, I mean, I think that oftentimes these continuation schools, these alternative schools are just not serving the purpose that they're meant to be. And they really are these dumping grounds for students who the other schools just don't want to deal with. And so they can just kind of abdicate their responsibility and say, hey, there's another place where we can put those students. And I think in a lot of ways, if schools like Crossroads just didn't exist, then schools like Pinnacle would just say, okay, now we have to step up and make sure the student graduates. They care about their reputation. They don't want dropout rate to go up. They would trust me, like they would get those students to graduate. They would help them. They have the resources, but they don't have to worry about it. They can just kind of skim that percentage off. And it's not that many students. You know, it's 2% of the district or something. It's not a lot. It's maybe 250 students who are at Crossroads every year. So they could definitely manage that. I think to your sort of larger question about kind of discipline and criminalization more broadly, you know, I've been thinking a lot recently about like SROs and those sorts of things. Like right now I'm doing some work in Syracuse in that school district, which is very segregated. You know, I was there last week and there was I guess you could call it a fight, but it was two girls who were, two Black girls who were in each other's face, just yelling, cussing each other out. And it was kind of in between classes. And I was talking to the teacher in the doorway. And these SROs, you know, they come running in and they're grabbing them and pulling them and all this stuff. And it just got me thinking, like, you know, there are times when, first of all, like, is that the best way to handle that situation? And I'm going to follow up and kind of see what ended up happening with that situation. But oftentimes that results in a suspension. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is out of school for 3 days or a week because of that. And that might have been something that could have been handled in a different way, that wasn't so punitive. You know, I remember, you know, and you're absolutely right. Like students will get, they'll end up getting stuff on their record because they like don't want to participate. And then it's like resisting, then they get like resisting and disorderly conduct and all these things. And another issue is often these SROs are like failed cops in the city, right? So they didn't work out on their beat and they have like discipline cases against them. So then we put them in a high school, which is ridiculous because they have no ability to deal with young people. And so, right, so it's like, well, you can't, you know, we can't trust you to do a beat. So we'll just park you at a high school where it's easier. And then they end up violating these kids' rights. So I think that's a big problem. So I think we need to, the whole like SRO system just needs to be revamped and be way less kind of law enforcement driven. Like here, even at Crossroads, like it's a police officer and he's like strapped up, like he's ready to, you know, like he's, you know, I don't know, like it's the end of a, you know, end of a concert and people are, you know, intoxicated and he's got to go and restore. Like, no, it's not like that. Like I said, I saw one fight in 2 years at Crossroads. And it wasn't because the officer was there. He wasn't even there when that happened. He came like running across like from inside the office. He wasn't there to stop it. So I saw more at Pinnacle, and ironically, there was no officer because they didn't think they needed to be around. So I just think that we need to just think about it differently. But I think there's some racism in it too. I mean, the schools where you see this are schools that have more Black and brown students. It's like, that's where we're going to put the cops. So there's just a lot of stuff you're making me think about. But, you know, I just think we need to have a more of a restorative justice type of approach than like, let's punish them, let's suspend them, because they just fall further behind.
That's the follow-up point. One of the things that I know about in my dissertation, I looked at youth observation and Illinois, is that no one's paid attention to the white man in the South, who typically because they have higher rates on them. But most, if not all, in my family were severe mental health disorder, substance misuse, but it was the Black males who reported weapons. These are all kids on probation. And so it really makes you question in my own like clinical work, where when I would go to do like crisis intervention with a young white male, they were ready to kill her. Yeah, like school or
Yep.
had a plan of some sort versus other children might in fact be talking about market. And I think that a lot of the overinvestment in surveillance often leads other children that could vary by race out of the process of learning because there's this hyper focus on other who, like, for example, may not problem like one fight, no police, no security or anything. But then you have these other students who might be struggling or having difficulty, but they know they're not going to be acknowledged. Right. So it's a double-sided.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it would be beneficial to everybody, right? Because then you could focus on more people instead of just like targeting, right? Like I think there was some study where they had they had teachers watch a video of like Black preschoolers and white preschoolers like playing with Play-Doh at a table, and they would like look for bad behavior, right? And everybody looks at the Black student. Black teachers look at the Black student, white teachers look at the Black student. Like it didn't matter. Everybody, like they could just like measure where their eyes were going. They're going. So I think that like, yeah, I think that to your point, like, you know, the other students could have been, you know, licking the Play-Doh and you might miss it. Yeah, you might miss it. So yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you so much for your wisdom. That was amazing. I learned a lot from it. Thank you. I have like 5 comments, but I will make it short.
Okay.
Similar to you with your 23. So one was just looking at the ways that you're talking about that Crossroads wasn't, what would happen if Crossroads was not there. And I think that's a really interesting point. And I was wondering if, you know how there's like dropout rates? I wonder if there was more transparency to the public about how many times they transfer students, and would that help with kind of creating accountability, even though at the moment it would be great to not have a Crossroads, but I wonder if that would help with the like accountability element. That's one thought. The other was like thinking about the Board of Education not being able to, or making it so that they're not able to graduate. I was surprised by that.
Mhm.
How was that allowed? Thinking about also student organizations, would it be helpful to have student organizations at this place so that like individuals are not, I was in a substance use class in public health and talking about the importance of student organizations at the like after school programs basically to help with what to do after class, right? Individuals are much more easily influenced by other people if they don't have things to do after class, right? And the return, I was wondering about the return to Pinnacle afterwards. You said that there was not much for that. Can you tell me more about that too? Those
Yeah.
are 3 of them. I have more, but
Yeah, great questions. So in terms of the sort of dropout aspect of it, so I mean, really, this alternative education continuation school model is supposed to be about dropout prevention. Like that's the point of doing this. And I just think the problem is that it's just grown into be something else where these flagship schools are sort of using gaming the system to offload students who are struggling. You know, not necessarily breaking the rules or the law, but just having a hard time in class, oftentimes through no fault of their own. So I think that's from part of the problem. You know, one thing that I am not able to talk about in this book, just kind of beyond the scope of this project, is I thought it would be interesting to sort of compare, like if you graduate from Crossroads or you graduate from Pinnacle from like the remedial track, right? You know what I mean? Because I'm trying to say like, no, keep them all at Pinnacle. Like don't send anybody to Crossroads. Okay, so what happens if you graduate from like the remedial, because it's heavily tracked. I mean, their remedial track at Pinnacle is called Sheltered. So like what if you graduate via, yeah, it's called Sheltered. So they have like AP, CP, something else in Sheltered. So like, what are you sheltering them from? But so what if you graduate from that track, right? And have that diploma that gives you that currency, or you leave from Crossroads, do the kids kind of end up in the same place? So I just think that would be interesting to sort of have something more longitudinal. because it would sort of, I think that would just kind of strengthen the argument. Like, you don't need to have these kids. I mean, if you have to, track them down low, but whatever you do, don't put them in a school that looks like a prison, which is just going to stigmatize them. Everybody knows, and all these stereotypes, everybody knows that they're there. They must be bad people now. That's not good. So I think that's part of it. In terms of the kind of after class, one of the problems with Crossroads that I write about in the book is that it was a really short day. So they were out of there, like 1 p.m. was probably the latest they were ever in school. And they have no homework. So imagine, you're 16 and you're just released into a city of 200,000+ people. Parents probably still at work for more hours. So, you're going to go to the park and hang out. Like, you're not going to go do work because there's no work to do. So they would kind of do all their packets at school, and then they could just go and just fool around for like hours. And I think that's a major problem. And because, the school didn't have clubs or sports, or there didn't have that. So I think that would be good. They have bolstered the vocational training apparatus at Crossroads in the last 5 years or so. So I had already left by then, which I think is good, because I think a lot of those students, for them, college may not be the best option, and they should have other options to have a career and earn a living. So I think that's a good thing. But, something else I write about in the book is in the counseling office at Crossroads, they have like the same college pennants up on the wall that they have up at Pinnacle. They got like UC schools, and they probably got Michigan up there. Like, they got all this stuff up there. It's like, nobody from this school is going to Michigan. Nobody's going there. But it's still like, that's still supposed to be the goal, right? So it's like, you all have failed, and now we're going to just try to salvage something from your life. But, so I think that there's a lot of issues with that. It's like college or bust. Okay, now what are we going to do? And then in terms of returning to Pinnacle, one group of students that I didn't really have much access to that I wanted to talk to students who had transferred back. And I just never had that opportunity. And it's kind of one of my regrets, but typically, they didn't usually transfer back, or they would recover credits early, and then Pinnacle would resist. And then they'd be like, okay, second semester, senior year, you can come back, just so that you actually like get over the finish line. So it's like, wait, but I was eligible like 6 months ago or a year ago, and they would just like resist it. So they were quick to push kids out, and then very resistant to taking them back. And there were these like phone clashes between the administrators at the school, like, you need to take this kid back. They met the requirements. Well, no, they're just going to fail, right? So I think that was another aspect of it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your presentation today. I was curious about, one of the things that really stood out to me was how transparent a lot of the faculty were in the quotes that you shared with us today. And so I was curious about, is there any sort of culture within Pinnacle where there was faculty against transfers? And generally just your experience as a researcher, were you welcomed there? Were you welcomed at Crossroads?
Yeah.
And did they know like the purpose of your research, that you were looking into the transfers specifically?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So in terms of the, can you repeat your first question again? So I'm gonna take that one first.
Oh yeah, it was about how open the faculty were. So I was wondering if there were any faculty who
at Pinnacle,
were dismissive of the procedure.
Yeah, so there were faculty, so the entire Crossroads faculty were critical of the situation of the credit recovery system. I remember one teacher saying to me, like, this seems unconstitutional, the way that we do it in this district. Like, this is segregate. This is like, didn't we have like, this is a constitutional like problem here. So they had lots of questions. Like, wait, why are you sending this student over here? Like, wait, what's the problem? Wait, they only failed one class, or their GPA is whatever. Like, really? So I think that was a big problem. Jamal, for example, had a problem seeing the board because he needed glasses, and yet at Pinnacle, his seat was in the back of the classroom, and he never wore his glasses, and nobody ever followed up about it. So when he got to Crossroads, they're like, okay, you're sitting in the front row and we're gonna call your mom and make you bring your glasses. And that was part of the reason why he recovered credits, right? And then you could play football, but not in your class. So that was, so they had problems there with it. And also with the fact that the people at Pinnacle would like be quick to push kids out and then reluctant to take them back. So they had issues with it. At Pinnacle, not so much. Honestly, at Pinnacle, then more teachers had a problem with the Korean PTA than with Crossroads. They didn't like some of them didn't like the Korean PTA, or they had to like come around. They would say, oh, I didn't like it at first, but you know, I came around. And in the book, I write about how the Korean PTA really had to fight to maintain itself, because early on, people were like, why do you want to segregate yourselves? Like, you should be a part of the regular PTA. Come on, we accept everybody. Why do you need a separate PTA? And they really had to like fight to keep their group together. And there was a lot of backlash to their group in the beginning. But now that everything's fine. Now the regular PTA or the general PTA, I think they call it, one of those two names, and the Korean PTA, like they'll do events together. Like the two presidents work together. But in the beginning, it was like, why do you have to have your own like separate, you know, ethnically segregated group? So that was that. In terms of, I think you asked a question about like gaining people's trust and kind of access and things like that, and how much do they know? That's a tricky question. That's kind of an ethical question. And I think for, you know, ethnographers, like we think about this a lot because like we need access to field sites. Without access, we can't do our work. So like you have to trust me that I'm not gonna sabotage what you're doing, right? Or that I'm not trying, I don't have some agenda that I'm trying to get done. So I think a lot of it was just trying to let people know, like, I'm not a reporter. I'm not interested in writing. I don't have a story that I'm writing. I'm just interested in understanding the truth about how things work around here. So I think keeping things kind of vague, but truthful is the best approach. And then over time, you can gradually start to ask questions about other things. I think if I had said at the outset, you know, I'm interested in you know, racial inequality and the, you know, mechanisms of racial inequality in the district, there would probably not be a book. There would be no book. But as you saw, by 6 months or so in, they're telling me, you know, Asian students keep our rank high. Like they're saying that to me in a you know, openly. And you know, so I think just kind of finessing it and easing into it. And in the methodological appendix, I talk about what I call this like phased access. Like phase one is like, you know, right, it's like you can't just kind of dive in with everything you want to do right away. You have to build rapport and build some trust. So like you can't interview students on day one with access. Like, they, you know, you have to, I didn't interview anybody until probably 4 months. I spent 4 months just like fly on the wall in classroom, just like hanging out, didn't interview anybody. And then I like made a speech to different classrooms, like, hey, I'm writing this book. Would any of you interested in the interview? And then you get a lot of hands. But if I'd done it the first day, I might have like, all the kids would have been like, you know, maybe one hand. So I think taking time, being a good listener is really important. I think in the beginning, there's a paper I like in sociology, a methods paper about different fieldworker roles and informational yield that you can get from them. So I lean on that paper a lot. One of the roles is credentialed expert. So in the beginning, you're sort of a credentialed expert, right? Like I am a graduate student at University of Michigan, and I'm studying this, and I'm working with these faculty. I was like, oh, great, yeah, come on, see our school. Like that's fancy, right? So that's their credentials that makes you, right, somebody who they can sort of trust. Like you have an institution behind you that's you're sort of accountable to. And then over time, you develop a couple other roles. One of them is buddy researcher. So, you know, you want to be friendly with people in the setting. You know, you want to smile and be friendly, and you know, you don't want to be kind of standoffish or like that, because then they won't want you to come back. And another one is a controlled skeptic role. So that means that like people will say things and you say, oh, that's really interesting. Well, why do you do things that way? Or, oh, tell me more. Or, right. So you're sort of you're skeptical, but you sort of always buy what they say, you know, and so you can get more information. So I'd say those three roles, and there's another role that's like ardent activist, but it didn't really apply. That's a lot for people doing like social movements research. But I would say credentialed expert, buddy researcher, and controlled skeptic were three different fieldworker roles that I adopted at different points to get access to different people.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think there was 3 questions. There were 3 hands and then online.
So you started getting into this area. I think I found the Korean PTA the most fascinating because for a variety of reasons. So one of the questions you addressed, I was wondering how other people were making sense of their work. But you mentioned Borges, and the interesting there is when he talks about ethnic capital, he's talking about in terms of skills and accumulation of skills within an ethnic community. But they were doing something far more fascinating, which was they were leveraging their economic capital to get buy-in to their validity the fact that you could host a conference and the conference is organized with how your culture will actually support your children's engagement, and then socializing them to be committed to that by asking, what did you learn? How are you going to use? I guess the question is, how do you think what you learned about this community's use of their resources to the advantage of their children sort of broadens our understanding of how ethnic capital operates, who gets access to that, and the implications theoretically?
Great question. So I think, one thing that I found interesting about this was that it was embedded within the school. Often, we've seen this in other districts and schools and whatever, but it's usually like there's a, SAT prep center that all the kids in this community go to or in this neighborhood go to, right? Or it's through church. Everybody's at the church and they do it there. The thing that I found interesting about this was that it was like sanctioned by the school, embedded, like they met at the school, they had events at the school. So, those pictures that I showed were at the school. And so that's the part to me, it was sort of this institutionalization of the ethnic capital, embedding those ethnic resources within the school, which just improves it's almost like it streamlines the delivery of those resources to the students. It removes a layer of like, oh, you gotta get to the test center, or even just that. It's like, no, all you gotta do is go to the multi-purpose room. It's happening there, Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. So they definitely are leveraging the model minority stereotype and the positive aspects of it. We all know about the negative parts of it, but they're leveraging the positive aspects of it to say that, we are the community that cares about education. We are the ones who, we are the diamonds that you will be polishing as teachers. If you want a student to go to Michigan, this is my, right? Like, invest in my kid. That's where they're going, and that is totally the message. And they're not even hiding that. I mean, that's 100% right. Putting the names of the kids on the back of the program, like all of that is just a cue. And I tried really hard in the book not to be critical of it, because I had a lot of respect for these parents. I mean, they're doing their thing for their kids. The issue is that not all parents have this opportunity, and these parents are also quite affluent. And so, I think more of it is like, okay, knowing what we know about how that community is able to leverage resources, but others maybe cannot. What can we do so that they have some of those same opportunities? What can schools do to provide opportunities? Can they have other seminars on other topics? And not just on Confucianism, but can they have seminars on other topics that might help other students? And is there money to pay teachers to attend that type of a conference? So I think that is what I try to talk about in the book, is like knowing what we know about what they're able to do. How can we provide some of these opportunities to other communities that don't have that opportunity because the stereotype works like if you have if the model minority stereotype is strong, it's a comparative stereotype, right? So that means that if you have some students who are the model students, then you have other students who are bad ones. And so the stereotype was, well, there could be, and this is said by some teachers at Pinnacle, they would say, well, there could be like a Mexican parent, the Mexican parents could organize one, but they just don't do it. So they must not care about the school, right? So that's the problem, right? Which is just not true. They have other stuff that's going on. So I think that's what I'm trying to sort of think about in the book is like, how can we extend those opportunities?
All right. Again, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying the presentation and the topic. My question is, after you completed the book and your research, how did the school respond if you shared this with them? And is there change being done, or is it just sticking to their ways?
Yeah, so great question. So I shared things with them kind of along the way. I didn't want to kind of drop it on them at the end, and so I shared things along the way, and I shared things once I shared things actually at all stages. Like I said, like, this is what I'm thinking about, this is, and sometimes it would be to kind of help with access. So I would say, I'm thinking about this, and they would say, oh yeah, well, there's a teacher who teaches history and you might want to sit in on his class, or you might want to go hang out over there. So some of the sharing was kind of strategic on my part because it helped me get access to other spaces. But also I didn't want to just kind of drop it on them at the end. And I wanted to make sure that I was being accurate. So I would, I had like students read transcripts of interviews, right, stuff like that. I would offer that to them and they would do that. And that was also nice because it would allow them, sometimes they would say, oh, I forgot to say this. And then I would get more information. So I was pretty sure that tape was accurate and the transcript was accurate, but it was also just to like be respectful to them. Like, this is what I'm gonna talk about in the book. Or I would share with them a quote that I was thinking about using for an article or a chapter, and I would share that with them to be more specific. So not reading a 30-page interview transcript. And also, I think being there 2+ years, hundreds of hours, all the interviews, all the whatever, I think that the strength of that is that I can sort of feel confident that this is really what was going on. If I'd only been there for a month, then I'd probably be really nervous. Like I might have got this wrong, but like, I feel like I was there long enough, and I saw enough different things that I feel confident that this is really what's going on. And, I don't know, if folks don't like it, then why don't you like it? I mean, because this is what's happening. So my thing is, they're not going to not like that I said it. They might not like that it's going on. And I think that's been the response I've got. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize it was that bad. Right. So that I've gotten way more of that. I've gotten very, very little, actually, I've gotten nothing where people have been like, this doesn't sound like my district. I've had people guess the district who didn't even know what I was talking about. And for me, I actually like that. You say, oh, but I like that because it means I described it in a way that like they knew, because there's a lot of districts like this and they knew which one this was. A couple of people were like, oh, I think I went to Pinnacle, and I was like, what school did you go to? I was like, okay, yeah, you did go. So I think that, if you don't like it, and one of my mentors, Elijah Anderson, said, just be true to the data. Like, it is what it is. Put it out there. That's the most important thing. Do good work, make it rigorous, put it out there. Don't be afraid, because if people don't like it, then maybe that means it should be fixed. Doesn't mean you shouldn't report it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't write about it. So I tried to really lean on that, and I think but to finish up on your question, I haven't heard that they've changed anything at Pinnacle. Crossroads, though, they have created more vocational options for students at Crossroads. So they built, the district put money into build there's a kitchen, it's for culinary arts, and they have another thing. So they've definitely boosted that. They now have a cybersecurity class that students can take there. They've added more, and students they're all at Crossroads. So they've expanded their campus and created more offerings for vocational, which I think is probably a good thing. honestly.
Any other questions?
Oh, are there any questions online? Like, okay. Sean, thank you again. This was great. That as you were describing that, what's happened at Crossroads, it spoke to a point I was thinking as you were kind of presenting, which is that the only reputation that seems to matter is the reputation of Pinnacle. Like the reputation of Crossroads is incidental, but there's honor in what Crossroads does, or at least there should be, but that doesn't seem to be valued by either the administrators at Pinnacle or the presentation that's made to parents about sending their children there. There doesn't seem to be any honor in what Crossroads does, but there ought to be, I feel like, and there ought to be some honor in helping students succeed. And it doesn't all have to be success aimed at going to elite institutions. There is honor in doing work that helps people graduate high school, but that doesn't seem to come across in anybody's understanding, in anybody's sort of reputation and how they think about Crossroads. And I thought that was just meaningful to mention.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that, so the book is very, very much not critical of like Crossroads teachers who are like all doing the best they can with limits, within some tough limits. And I think that's, and the part that's unfortunate is because there's this stigma around being there, often teachers will get there and they just try to leave because they're like, I don't want to get pigeonholed. I don't want to get stuck, as like a alternative teacher, a continuation school teacher. I don't want to be labeled like that. So the labels, and there's a whole chapter on teachers in the book, because the labels that the teachers get were actually kind of similar to the ones the kids get. There's the stigma. So they go to conferences and people like aren't sitting with them because they're like, oh, you're from continuation school, like that kind of thing. Like, oh, you don't know, so you don't understand what happens at like a real high school, that type of vibe. So I think that's a problem. And I think that this district is so just so competitive that like all the schools are way above the state average. Like the worst school in the district would be, would be a really, really good high school, like almost everywhere. And I think in that environment, if you struggle, you're just that much more of an outlier. I just think that's not right. So I hope that them sort of increasing their vocational offerings is an acknowledgement in some way that there are pathways to a successful life for kids other than four-year college. And so I hope that that's kind of what that is an investment in. So I think it'd be interesting to kind of look at that and see how that's changed in the last few years. But yeah, I think you're right. They're doing their best. They're just in a really difficult environment. There are other continuation schools in other districts that are less intense that just have a different reputation, different experience. And actually, credit recovery model works better there. So, so again, I try not to be too cynical about just life and stuff in general, and just try to remember that, like, we kind of know what works. We know how to fix these problems, and it's really just about the political will and sometimes the courage to act on it. And I think that's the case with this district. And I think that courage would be, don't send other people to Crossroads. Keep them at Pinnacle. Let them graduate. You're responsible. They're your kids. They're your public school. You should be able to help them with your resources.
Thank you, Dr. Drake, for your presentation. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to give a special thanks to Patrick and Michael for helping coordinate this event as well as the web team. So Robert, wherever you are, thank you. Yay! You're great. And so we're done. I think Dr. Drake will stick around for a few minutes. Please grab some snacks and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks again for coming.